Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and once again, welcome. As the cantor sang, it is, and we sang with her, it is good when brothers and sisters can come together as one. And as the service was going on this morning, I was thinking about this service in the context of the larger world we find ourselves in, where someone had just said to me, it's so crazy. Everywhere you look, it's so crazy. It's so frightening. It's so dangerous. And it's true. So here we affirm old ideas and we hold on to the values that matter. And even in the context of a crazy world, we can at least feel some comfort. At least I hope you can feel some comfort being in both the sanctity and the safety of this sanctuary. So good Shabbos to you all. And there's one of the things that I was also thinking about, and last night Rabbi Eppelbaum addressed it so well, is we know this is Super Shabbat, the Shabbat of the Super Bowl weekend. But even the Super Bowl is not immune from the craziness, as there's this conspiracy theory that's flying around, you know? And when I think about that conspiracy theory and who is involved, I do think that maybe the only one that we can be certain will be a winner tomorrow is Kelsey. Either way. I know we have someone from San Francisco here, and so she hopes that it's only because of Taylor Swift. Yeah. So I've read a story or heard a story in a number of different sources about a leader of a political party in Hungary called Jobbik. It's an ultra-nationalist Hungarian political party that's been described with the following words. It's been described as racist, fascist, neo-Nazi nationalist, and anti-Semitic. It has accused Jews of being part of a cabal of Western economic interests attempting to control the world. The libel that's known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And of course, their whipping boy has been the Jew, George Soros. Not long ago, Jobbik asked for a list of all the Jews in the Hungarian parliament, and they began to threaten them. And Jobbik is playing a greater and greater significant role in the political scene in Hungary. And I read the following story in an essay by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and I had seen it previously too. Until about 8 years ago, maybe a little bit more, one of the party's leading members was a man named Shinad Szegedy. He was young and he was up and coming. He was charismatic and he was widely assumed to be the future leader of Jobbik and perhaps all of Hungary. But something extraordinary happened to this ultra-right-wing Hungarian nationalist, this neo-Nazi, this anti-Semite, as is often the case in politics and power. Some of Jobbik's members wanted to inhibit Szegedy's progression to power. And so his distractors began to research his life, digging deep, and they dug up dirt on this young, charismatic leader, which we know is one of the things that keeps a lot of good people from going into politics everywhere, for nobody has a perfect background. What they found was shocking. Not only shocking to them, but they believed it would knock him out of power. This young politician, Shinad Szegedy, had Jewish grandparents. And almost the entire maternal side of his family died in Auschwitz. His grandparents, though, survived and decided after the war they would never live a life of a Jewish family. They would never admit to being Jewish. They would get rid of any semblance of Judaism from their home. But they couldn't. It was uncovered. And so when Geddy learned this truth, he went to, of all people, a local Chabad rabbi. And he began to learn a little bit about his essential identity. He researched past generations of his family. He began to study Jewish history, and he ventured into the world of Torah. He was a stranger in a strange land. He studied at classes. He went to shul on Shabbat, where most of those in attendance did not treat him as a friend or a member, but treated him as a stranger. He said he was treated like a leper. But he learned Hebrew. He changed his name to David, and he converted with Brit Milah. When the news first hit the Jabbok party, his best friend in the party said, "The best thing that we could do to you is to kill you, and then you'll be buried as a Hungarian." And another friend encouraged a public apology, and Shenad's response was, "I'm not going to apologize because my ancestors were murdered at Auschwitz." The realization that he was a Jew began a transformation of his understanding of the world and of human beings. And he began to see that a Jew had responsibilities in this world. A Jew not only had to live life in a certain way, but had to model something for the rest of the world. Shenad Segedi's story is more than just a curiosity. It gets to the heart of the precarious nature of our existence, not just as Jews, but as moral human beings. Tragically, we have seen over and again how nationalism and tribalism has interfered with a desire for morality. We forget about the value of other human beings. You know what makes us civil human beings is that we can be reflective, that we can think things through, that we're willing to evaluate our own behaviors, that we understand that teshuvah is a gate that is open to all of us. We can think critically as rational human beings, and we can push ourselves to see more, to know more, not just scientifically and technologically, but also morally. And this journey begins with our capacity to see things through the eyes and the minds of another. And that's exactly what this Hungarian Jewish politician did. He had to begin to look at the world through different eyes. I think that part of the very foundation of the journey that was started by Avraham and continued through our forefathers and continued through Moshe and continued through the prophets and the sages, the great rabbinic minds and voices, all of those who shaped the thinking of and requirements for living Jewishly, they found their voices through the earliest call of the Torah. They were called to be a people who reflected and took responsibility for tzedek and mishpat, righteousness and justice, as described in God's call to Abraham, or the very litany of the rules that we read this morning in Parshat Mishpatim. Our value systems that lace a parsha like today call for things like fairness, the proper treatment of the underserved, the proper respect for and concern for the oppressed and strangers, the honor that must be shown to the ger, to the outsider, to the convert. It's in this week's Parsha. The responsibility, not just for your own things, but the property of others. The obligation to be kind, to show respect, to live a life with some humility and more. In truth, our laws are about, in broad strokes, don't do harm, don't harm others, and do something in the face of wrongdoing. because to not do something when you see something is wrong is not an option. If religion is not based on relationships between human beings, if religion is not about our connection to God's creation, all of God's creation, then it doesn't address that which elevates humanity and the human spirit. To be Jewish may be belonging to a people, for sure, creating ethical and moral and safe communities. But the essential component of all of this is found in the notions of holiness, reverence, decency, thoughtfulness, and respect. And I give this talk now as the theme of my sermon because our Jewish lives, which are so multifaceted, and you know that, there's so many dimensions to being a Jew, identifying as a Jew, expressing your Jewishness. But it's all been very singularly focused now, for good reason. And with that, we have to be careful, because we cannot allow our nationalism to turn us into a Jewish Hungary. That is not what this Torah calls for. So let me get back to Shenad Segedi. He was essentially forced by events beyond his control to look into history, the mind, the culture, the experience of being Jewish, and it opened up his world. It changed his direction. This former Hungarian nationalist was willing to walk into a world that he previously hated and condemned. But the forced experience gave him a new identity. It wasn't just biology, it wasn't genetics. It was a world of mitzvah, which is a connection to God. A world with respect for others. These days, as you know, and rightfully so, we're concerned about security, safety, and survival. But in the midst of all that, months later, we cannot lose sight of the values that define us and that which ultimately holds us together. And we're defined by a Torah. This Shabbat, there are two commandments that are quite similar to each other. Kaylee mentioned one of them. And they're repeated over and over and over again in the Torah more than any other commandments. The first was found in chapter 22, verse 21. It said, "You must not mistreat or oppress the stranger in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once strangers in the land of Egypt." And the second is found a chapter later in Exodus 23:9. It says, "You must not oppress strangers. You know what it feels like to be a stranger, for you yourselves were once strangers in the land of Egypt." We know that. Over and over and over again, we hear this lesson. Do you know how many times it's written in the Torah that we should not forget that we were strangers, that we were slaves, that we were oppressed? 36 times in the Torah. 36 times. It's the very core to our existence. It's why we're called Hebrews, way before Egypt, because we came from the other side. We are Ivrim. We began as a people who were other than, and we began searching for a home. What was the experience that created us as a people? The experience was our root experience, the formative experience. We were slaves. You know, and you have often heard me quote, the most significant line, I believe, in the Passover Haggadah goes like this. And in every generation, one should see himself or herself as if he or she personally experienced the exodus from Egypt. This is not about holding on to resentment against Egypt. In fact, later on, we're told that we are not to hold on to our resentment against Egypt. It's about remembering the pain of our past when we see others in pain. And the impact is that we have to be an empathic people. We are Rachamim b'nei Rachamim. We're merciful people, the children of merciful people. And sometimes, maybe most of the times, that's not easy when you live in a cruel world. Perhaps we can say that the greatest crimes of humanity, however, have been committed against the stranger and the outsider. Ancient Greeks called non-Greeks barbarians. The Germans called us vermin. In Rwanda, the site of the world's most recent genocide, Hutus called Tutsis cockroaches. That's the way they saw those who were different. After 42 years in this holy calling of the rabbinate and some 60 years of learning Torah, I believe the essence of it all is found in our treatment of others, those next to us, our loved ones, our family members, our neighbors, and the strangers also. One of the earliest questions that was asked in the Torah is asked by God after Cain murdered his brother Abel. You remember the question? He said, "Where is your brother?" And Cain answered with a question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" But what we see is that he is, definitively. That's the point. He is his brother's keeper. The answer is we are responsible partners in this world, and sometimes it feels really hard to be the responsible partner when we feel as if we are always victimized. But we're not always victimized. We also enter the world with a great deal of power and strength, and we should be able to understand that. In these very difficult days, there's so much hatred and so much uncertainty about identity. How powerful it is, then, that we can tell our children, our young and our old, that to be Jewish is to care for others. Being Jewish is about the capacity to see the face of God in the face of your neighbor. So let me close with one more teaching, and many of you may know it. The Talmud begins with Masechet Brachot. And the very first question the rabbi is asked has to do with what is the proper time to say the Shema at Mariv? And what is the proper time to say the Shema in Shachrit? When the rabbis are defining the hour to say the morning Shema, they say it's before you actually see the sun rising, but there's some form of light in the world. And how does one know when the sun is rising before it can be seen over the horizon? And they say that it's when you can make out the features of your neighbor's face. That's when we say the Shema. What can that possibly mean? The best understanding I know is that when we say Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, it's then that we see the presence of God in another. Personally, in my own career, in my own life, I cannot give up the idea that my deep commitment to Judaism, to the Jewish people, to Torah, and to Israel has always led me to go beyond myself and beyond our people, and to engage with other people and to support those projects that bring people together. Not to weaken our identity by any means, but to strengthen it. I know I have something as a Jew that I can offer others. And it would be quite arrogant of me to say that I don't have anything that I can get offered by others. I can. Amongst the dangers of these times is found in the attitude that so many people carry, that everybody hates us. It's simply not true. I hear the cries, where were the Christian neighbors, and where's the voices of the non-Jewish world, and where's the black community with whom we stood during the civil rights struggles? You know what? If you look for them, you'll find them. You'll find voices of black leadership. You find voices of Christian leadership. You find your neighbors amongst the many voices who empathize with us and understand what our struggles are. We shouldn't be amongst those who out of fear create an alienation from the world. I'm not naive. There've always been and will always be forces in the world that hate us and want to destroy us. But we have choices as to how we stand up against those forces. And I believe that we stand up against those forces first and foremost with strength, but never losing our sense of goodness. And that's a difficult balance, but it can be done. I know that our synagogue is known throughout this community because it's a synagogue that cares for other people beyond our walls. That's why in 2 weeks we will be celebrating Summer Fairman in the great work that she has done and how the entire community looks to us when there's need. When people are anxious, when people are fearful, when people feel threatened, the worst can come out. And so we are challenged during even these difficult days, challenged to see what we have that's good, challenged to understand our strengths, challenged to understand that we live in a world amongst many other people, and we can't expect to live alone. We're human beings, we're Jews, we share something similar, and we have many differences also. And difficult as these days are, we cannot allow our challenges to blind us to thinking rationally, to looking for solutions at the end of the road, and seeing that all of our challenges are nuanced, and they all have to be guided by our essential values. Life isn't black or white. Life isn't just lived in this moment. There's so many shades of gray, and there's a past that we have to call upon, a past where we both suffered, but also we shared in celebration. And we look forward to a future that we have a role in creating, understanding that none of us can do it alone. We need each other. We need partners in creating a better world. And sometimes that calls for self-reflection. I want to complete this with a quote from, of all people, the poet Virginia Woolf. She once said, "To enjoy freedom, we have, of course, to control ourselves. We must not squander our powers helplessly and ignorantly, squirting half the house in order to water a single rose." Let's not forget our power. It resides in learning. It resides in our values, in our goodness, in our kindness, and in our strength. We can only move forward, though, one step at a time. Be careful. Don't allow others to let us lose our balance. We have something to offer this world, something very important, something that's found in there and found within us. Shabbat Shalom.